memento of the earthly body, even when the bones alone could be preserved. Mummy making in the ritual begins with collecting the bones and piecing them together, if only in a likeness of the skeleton. It is at this stage that Horus is said to collect the bones of his father Osiris for the resurrection in a future life by means of transubstantiation. The same primitive mode of preparing the mummy is implied when it is said to the solar god on entering the underworld, "Reckon thou thy bones, and set thy limbs, and turn thy face to the beautiful Amenta." See 133, Renouf. Teta, deceased, is thus addressed to Heta. "Thou hast raised up thy head for thy bones, and thou hast raised up thy bones for thy head." Also the hand of Teta is said to be like a wall as support of Horus in giving stability to his bones. Thus the foundation was laid for building the mummy type as a present image of the person who had passed. Amongst other types, the Yucatanese made little statues of their fathers. The head was left hollow so that the ashes of the cremated body might be placed in the skull, as in an urn. This, says Landa, was then covered with the skin of the occiput taken from the corpse. The custom is akin to that which has been unearthed in the European bone caves, where the skulls of the adult dead are found to have been trepanned, and the bones of little children inserted instead of human ashes. In sign language, the bones of the child were typical of rebirth in a future life. The desire to live and the longing for a life after death in earlier times are inexpressible, and the efforts made to give some kind of expression to the feeling are ineffably pathetic. Acudna relates that it was a custom with the South American Indians to preserve and keep the dead bodies of relatives in their homes as long as was possible, so as to have their friends continually before their eyes. For these they made feasts and set out viands before the dead bodies. Here, in passing, we would suggest that in the Egyptian custom, as described by both Herodotus and Plutarch, it was not the dead mummy that was brought to table as a type of immortality, but the image of the Ka, which denoted what the guests would be like after death, and was therefore a cause for rejoicing. Carrying the Ka image round the festive board was just a Karaite prototype of the elevation and carrying round of the host for adoration in the Church of Rome. Indeed, the total paraphernalia of the Christian mysteries had been made use of in Egyptian temples. For instance, in one of the many titles of Osiris, in all his forms and places he is called Osiris in the Monstrance. Writ, Ch. 141, Neville. In the Roman ritual, the monstrance is a transparent vessel in which the host or victim is exhibited. In the Egyptian cult, Osiris was the victim. The elevation of the host signifies the resurrection of the crucified god, who rose again in spirit from the corpus of the victim, now represented by the host. Osiris in the monstrance should of itself suffice to show that the Egyptian Christ is the original Christ, and that the Egyptian mysteries were continued by the Gnostics and Christianized in Rome. The mode of conveying the oral wisdom to the initiate in the mysteries of young man making was continued in the mystery of mummy making. Whilst the mummy was being prepared for burial, chapters of the ritual were read to it, or to the conscious Ka, by an official who was known as the man of the roll. Every Egyptian was supposed to be acquainted with the formula, from having learned them during his lifetime, by which he was to have the use of his limbs and possession of his soul restored to him in death, and to be protected from the dangers of the nether world. These were repeated to the dead person, however, for greater security during the process of embalming, and the son of the deceased, or the master of the ceremonies, took care to whisper to the mummy the most mysterious parts, which no living ear might hear with impunity. Maspero, The Struggle of the Nations, Ang Trans, pp. 510, 5-1. But it is an error to suppose with some Egyptologists like M. de Horak that the new existence of the deceased was begun in the old earthly body. Proceed Society of Archaeology Vol. V, March 4, 1884, p. 126. The resurrection of the dead in mummy form may look at first sight as if the old dead corpse had risen from the sepulchre. But the risen is not the dead mummy, it is a type of personality in the shape of the mummy. It is what the ritual describes as the mummy, form of a god. The mains prays, "May I too arise and assume the mummied form as a god, that is, as the mummy of Osiris, the form in which Amsu Horus rose, a type of permanent preservation, but not yet one of the spirits made perfect by possession of the Ka. It was this mistake which led to a false idea that the Egyptians held the dogma of a corporeal resurrection of the dead, which became one of the doctrines that were fostered into fixity by the agnostic Christians. The Osiris, as mortal Maze, or Amsu, Horus as divinity, does rise in the mummy form. But this is in another life and in another world, not as a human being on our earth. It has the look of a physical resurrection in the old body, and so the ignorant misinterpreters mistook it and founded on it a corporeal basis for the future life. In the Christian scheme, the buried dead were to rise again in the old physical corpus for the last judgment in time at the literal ending of the world. This was another delusion based on the misrendering of the Egyptian wisdom. The dead who rose again in Amenta, which was the ground floor of a future state of existence, also rose again for the judgment. But this took place in the earth of eternity, which was mistaken by the Christians for the earth of time. Just as they had mistaken the form of the risen Sahu for the old body of matter that never was supposed to rise again by those who knew. The earthly mummy of the deceased does not go to heaven, nor does it enter the solar boat, yet the Osiris is told to enter the boat, his reward being the seat which receives his Sahu or spirit mummy, writ. C. 130. Clearly this can only refer to the spiritual body, as the earthly mummy was left on the earth outside the gates of Amenta. Not only is the corporeal mummy not placed on board the boat of souls, the deceased was to be represented by a statue of cedar wood anointed with oil, or, as we might say, Christified, 134:9-10. There is no possible question of a corporeal resurrection. The object, aim, and end of all the spiritualizing processes is to become non-corporeal in the earthly sense, that is, as the ritual represents it, to defecate into pure spirit. The word Sahu, or the mummy, is employed to express the future form as well as the old. But it is a spiritual Sahu, the divine mummy. Even the bones and flesh of souls are mentioned, but these are the bones of Osiris, the backbone of the universal frame, and the flesh of Ra. The terms used for the purpose of divinizing are antipodal to any idea of return to corporeality as a material mummy. The mummy of the Manes is a Sahu of the glorified spirit. This state of being is attained by the deceased in chapter 73. I am the beloved son of his father. I come to the state of a Sahu of the well-furnished manes. He is said to be mummified in the shape of a divine hawk when he takes the form of Horus. 78:15-16. Not as the earthly mummy in a resurrection on our earth. The resurrection of Osiris was not corporeal. The mummy of the god in matter or mortality rises from the tomb, transubstantiated into spirit. So complete is the transformation that he is Osiris bodily, changed into Horus as a Sahu or spirit. The Egyptians had no doctrine of a physical resurrection of the dead. Though they retained the mummy as a type of personality, it was a changed and glorified form of the earthly body, the mummy that had attained its feet in the resurrection. It was the Karast mummy, or word for word and thing for thing. Amsu Horus was the Karaite Christ who rose up from the mummy as a spirit. Also, it is entirely false to represent the Egyptians as making the mummy and preserving it for the return of the soul into the old earthly body. That is but a shadow of the true idea cast backwards by Christianity. Millions of cats were made into mummies and sacredly preserved around the city of Bubastis, but not with the notion of a bodily resurrection. They were the totems of the great cat clan or its metropolis, the Egyptian clan Chatan, which had become symbols or fetishes of religious significance till later times when the totemic mother as the cat, the seer by night, was divinized in the lunar goddess Pasht, and the worshippers embalmed her zootype. Not because they adored the cat, but because the deess herself was the great mother typified by the cat. Both the mother and the moon were recognized beyond the cat, which was their totemic zootype and venerated symbol. Osiris was the mummy of Amenta, in two characters. In one he is the Khat, mummy lying laid out with corpse-like face upon the funeral couch. In the other he is the mummy risen to his feet and reincorporated in the glorious body. These two characters were continued as the Corpus Christi and the risen Christ in Rome. Hence, in the iconography of the catacombs, the Egyptian mummy, as Osiris Sahu, and as Horus the new-born solar child, are are the demonstrators of the resurrection for the Christian faith, where there is no testimony whatever to an historical event.